just here, learned something about Jason. Didn't know, that he was a military veteran. That's just something that I'd never heard. I also want to point out that if they were married in 2013, the first paragraph says that a shared love of serving a mission brought Jason and Abby together a few years ago. A decade is more than a few. I know that as we get older, we try and downplay the passing of time. But, other than that, but as they come and they share with us, they're going to share some about their missions ministry, some of what they do and the function that they serve, and they'll probably give you a much clearer picture than I ever could. And so I'm just going to go ahead and invite Jason and Abby Torgeson to come up. I've got your microphones for you, and then there's also this clicker for advancing your slides. Just hit the other. So there you go.
Thank you for the red one. I didn't want the yellow one. So it is so good to be up here. The reason we keep it is just a few years because as the hair is going, it makes me more aware of how much older I'm getting. And I think this is the last time that we're going to stay anybody and let them supply shredded wheats with all the sugar on top of it because they were just rambunctious today. So I don't know what's going on.
I don't know that that's just today, but...
Oh, well, my eyes were open today in church, so I could say I got something out of it.
It's just because in Latin America, church is so loud you can't hear yourself sing, so no one notices when kids are running circles.
Yeah, and one of the other quick cultural things before I introduce the family is, we'll go to the next slide. You'll get a picture here. I think, which one is it? Probably not. Is it the top one? See, there we go.
Aha, blue light.
That would be my responsibility to turn it on, right? Technology. Well, I got a blue light now. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. And so, as you see, we have 3 kids, some more rambunctious than the others. But shredded wheats was this morning for cereal, so I'm blaming the shredded wheats for the hyperactivity. One of the things that really struck me with Josiah, just being here in the Western PA, this feels a lot like home in the sense I was raised in northern Idaho, so I was raised very much in an area that's a lot like Western PA, so it's always been great to be here in Western PA. But one of the things Josiah told Abby the other day, I'll let you tell the story because you'll have to correct me because I'll say the wrong thing.
Well, he was talking about going camping. He's gone camping with Jason a few times, so when he saw the camping thing, he was a little bummed that we weren't going to be in the area for that because he said, I just love camping. I just love going in the tent, and it smells like freedom. So, good 4th of July anecdote for you there. Camping smells like freedom.
I always think it smells something different than freedom. As more days goes on, it smells less like, or it smells more like shoes or stinky socks or no showers, but he's got a different perspective. But we are Jason and Abby Torgeson. We are the regional connectors for Latin America, and that's a fancy way to say that we get to oversee kind of all the work that's happening in Latin America. So that's everything from Mexico south, that's Portuguese or Spanish speaking, falls in our region. So we'll talk a little bit more of what we do and how we do it. And just wanted to say that we are so grateful to be here this morning. It was an honor. I've taken this my 3rd trip in the last 4 months that I've been in Western PA, so it is a joy to be back up here. Want to talk a little bit, since you guys are new in the sense of you haven't heard our presentation, who we are. We kind of start with our story, so I'll share a little bit of my story as I kind of pan the room to make sure that my story is appropriate. Kids are out of the kids class. So I was raised as a heathen. My dad was military, so one of the number 1 rules in our family was do not lose your military ID. That was the number 1 rule. The number 2 rule was if you're going to drive, if you're going to drink, don't drive. If you're going to have sex, use protection. And if you want to try drugs, make sure it was natural. That was kind of the general upbringing in my life, but don't lose your military ID card. And so growing up, I don't know where it came from, but how many of you guys remember Christmas Eve? If you were a normal family and open presents on Christmas Day, unlike my wife who opens them on Christmas Eve, I won't judge you if you do, but that feeling of anticipation, how many of you guys can realize that anticipation when all of a sudden you're just super excited about something? How many of you ever had that excited feeling and not know what it's for? Where all of a sudden you're just like, wow, there's something, what is it? Why am I feeling this rush of just excitement over something? And that was how I was raised. is that I had this feeling that there was something more to life. And when I ended up 17, my dad moved. They moved my senior year in high school. I went from Florida to Bellingham, Washington, to Ferntucky, or it's called Ferndale. But it was very much of a hick town, very out in the wilderness. And one of the things that struck me was I thought I had life made. I had a job. I had a pickup truck. I was working at the movie theater, so I had unlimited movies that I wanted, unlimited popcorn, and yet I was still dissatisfied as I was looking around, and I was like, there's something more to life. So I did the next best thing. As I came home to tell my parents one day, I said, hey, I figured it out. I'm gonna go to college. My parents laughed. I said, Jason, we're not college people. None of us. You barely made high school. And he says, we can't afford college. I mean, how are you going to pay for it? And so I decided I'm going to go into the service. Because if I go into the service, I can get my college paid for, and I can do something different because I know there's something more for me. So fast forward into basic training. Being in basic training, 900 grown men, all bald heads, and crying and singing Amazing Grace was the moment that I just realized this is what it is. We weren't crying because we lost our hair. That came later. But it was just absolutely amazing. And in that process, when we went from basic training and all those promises that were made, and going to technical school, where you get your freedoms back, as I was getting ready to make the turn right back to my old ways, a mentor, a guy that introduced Christianity to my older sister, got stationed at the base at the same time and walked alongside me in that process. And that was where it kept me from going back to my old ways. And I turned and I said, okay, I'm going to follow the Lord. And since then, I have not looked back, and it has been an incredible journey. As I got out of that, got into Washington, I was on staff at Cornwall Church, small church, about 2,400 people up in Washington State. Church of God up there. Bob Marble, if you know Bob Marble, his son Gerald Marble's son Bob Marble is our senior pastor in our home church there in Bellingham. And then as I was going, I thought I had it all figured out, and God says, you need help.
So my story is pretty different than Jason. Some of you know my family. My dad is Greg Smith, was a pastor of Clarion and Butler and Punxsutawney through the years. So I grew up as a Church of God pastor's kid. Grandparents were Church of God pastors. Same slide. Great-grandparents were Church of God pastors. And so it was very deeply rooted. I spent several of my formative years growing up here in Western Pennsylvania, going out to Whitehall and all of that. And so as I was growing up, I always loved the church. I loved God. I never really had any intentions of leaving the faith, but I didn't really have any interest in going into ministry for myself. And my plan was that I was going to go to law school. I said, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go to law school. I'm not going to be one of those people who changes their minds. I'm focused. I know what I'm going to do. I know my path. And as I was in college, I felt the Lord leading me, and it's a whole series of events and all of this, but the Lord showing me, no, you're not going to go to law school, you're going to go to seminary. Seminary? I don't want to go to seminary. All right, fine. And so after some struggle, I accepted that. I said, all right, I'll go to seminary, but I am not going to be a missionary. I was already majoring in Spanish, but I had no interest in being in going to the mission field. And so as I started at seminary at Anderson University, I did go ahead and begrudgingly enter the missions program, thinking I could go on staff at a church and be a missions pastor or something like that. I had the opportunity to do an internship in Bogota, Colombia, which is a long story where I ended up there. But while I was in Colombia, I knew that this is where I was supposed to go. This is what I was supposed to do. And suddenly it was a shift in my heart, and I knew that there was nothing else for me but this call. And so I pursued that wholeheartedly, and as I walked through the process with the missions office at the time, with Church of God missions office, I prepared to go to Colombia. But before I could go to Colombia, I had to spend 4 months in language school in Costa Rica, just fine-tuning some Spanish. And I hated it. I didn't like the school. I didn't like the neighborhood where I was living. I didn't connect well with the church. I was pretty miserable. And there's kind of some reasons I can look back now and see what was actually going on that had nothing to do with Costa Rica. That was much more internal that I was processing. But the only thing that felt good about Costa Rica at the time was a couple by the name of Harry and Julia Noctegal. And every Sunday they picked me up for church and sometimes had me over for lunch, and they were very kind to me and very good to me. And so as I got to Colombia, I said, well, I'm glad I got all of that out of the way in Costa Rica. I was fresh. I was renewed. The Lord had done a lot of work in my heart, and I was ready to go. And I absolutely loved Colombia. And the time there, my service there, I learned a lot. I grew a lot. Was very happy. But during that time, Harry from Costa Rica, every once in a while, would check in. How's it going? We're praying for you and praying for your ministry. And Harry had this reputation of being a matchmaker, which I had up to that point ignored. And so he started saying, there's this missions pastor in Washington State, and you should send him your newsletter because maybe the church will support you. And, oh, by the way, he's single. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me that he's single or whatever. And so Harry realized I wasn't getting the hint, and so he continued to persist. And he's been to Costa Rica on a number of missions trips, and you'd be this great ministry couple, and you should get married, and here's the date that I think you should get married, and we hadn't yet met. And so over time, kind of out of a sheer awkwardness, I get an email from this guy like, I'm so sorry about my friend Harry. And I respond, that's okay. I know him. I know how he is. And eventually that started developing into, well, at the time it was like text messages through Skype. That's what there was. But so these turned into like 3-hour conversation and then another 3-hour conversation. And you get where the story's headed, right? And so Jason and I had the chance to get to know each other and started dating. And as things began to get more serious, we said, well, if we're going to get married, one of us should probably move. And so it made more sense at the time for me to finish up my 3-year commitment in Colombia and head up to Washington for us to start our life there. And so I got up to Washington and we get married. And those of you who know that, those of you who are married know that, it's not always wedded bliss immediately. And so as I'm settling into Washington, I'm realizing, when you're a missionary, whether you want to or not, you sometimes can get into your mind that you have a little bit of status, right? Because you're a North American in Colombia, people think you're cool. They want to speak English with you. You're a foreigner. You're different. You're interesting, right? You go to a church, people are interested in what you have to say. They want to hear your stories. They want to talk to you. Well, in Ferndale, Washington, and when I went to the grocery store, no one cared that I was American or that I spoke English or that I had been a missionary. I was just this normal person, and I didn't know what to do with that. And I didn't know how to engage, and I didn't know how to re-engage with life there in Washington. And so it was a really hard transition for me back into that life. And so we were attending Cornwall Church, the one that Jason mentioned. And one Sunday, I remember Pastor Bob was preaching on a verse that's very known to all of us, which I will go ahead and put up here. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And he reminded us, it's a nice verse in and of itself, but when you look at the larger context of the verse, it's a verse written to people in exile, people who were literally living in a place where they did not want to be. And so my mission in Washington was, okay, if we're going to build a foundation for our relationship and go into missions together, which was our plan, I want to build that foundation as fast as possible so that we can hurry up and get overseas. And so for me, Washington was this waiting time, like, let's get this over with so we can get back to where I really want to be. And what Bob reminded us in that sermon is that the Israelites were doing the same thing in exile. They wanted to hurry up and rush through this. But if you read the larger context where the Lord says to them, plant your gardens, marry off your sons and daughters, settle in because you're going to be here a while. And what's more, seek the welfare of the city to which I have called you into exile, because if it prospers, you too shall prosper. Bloom where you're planted. Establish yourselves and because God has a plan for you in that place, but God has a plan also for the people around you. And so I was really convicted and challenged by that and began to just take that on as, okay, how can I live and serve God and live out his plans right here and right now in this season, no matter how long it lasts. And it wasn't terribly long after that we started talking, okay, we think it might be time to go back overseas. Where is the best place for us to go? And we had kind of had this agreement that because Jason had been to Costa Rica a lot and it was kind of his world, and I did not enjoy Costa Rica. And I had lived in Colombia. That was kind of my world. We said, well, we'll start someplace new. Let's figure out where we're going to go. But as we started talking, the doors began to open toward Costa Rica. And you can imagine my reaction to that. And the way I said to my husband, you said, we're not going to Costa Rica. We're not going to Colombia. You know I hated Costa Rica. I don't ever want to go back to that place. And as I was driving one day, I felt the Lord saying, Abby, you fought me on the call to ministry. You fought me on the call to missions. You know what this feels like yet? Yes. Because I've trying to learn anyway that when we fight with God, we lose. Because even if we win and get what we want, we lose. Because we miss out on what God has for us. So I went to Jason and just said, I think we're going to Costa Rica. And even as we started preparing for Costa Rica and we started figuring out what kind of work and ministry we would have there, the office in Anderson approached us and said, we actually in Latin America, we don't have right now what's called a regional coordinator, the person who walks alongside the missionaries, the national leaders across the region. The ones that had been in that position had stepped aside, and they said, we're looking for that position, and we laughed. We said, how in the world could we ever do this? Now, I'm guessing no one else wanted to take it. I don't know. But as they spoke with us, they said, in Latin America, it's a little bit different. You don't necessarily have to have the same time in that maybe in another region, because we have an international elected team that's really starting to step up. And these are Latin Americans that are doing a lot more of the, casting a vision for the region and conflict management and some of those types of things that require long-term relationships to do well. What we really need is someone to walk alongside the missionaries, to supervise projects, and to work closely with the leadership and support them. And we said, that we can do. And so we ended up being appointed what's now called the regional connectors for Latin America. And as a part of that, we get to work with, as Jason said, the 20 Spanish and Portuguese-speaking countries south of Texas. And we also get to be a part of a team of other regional coordinators or connectors that work with the central office in Anderson. And as we were even starting out in our role, the whole office was in kind of in a shift of vision and strategy. And so we got to be a part of developing what is, very tiny up there, the new mission statement for, which is not so new now, 5 years old, but the mission statement for global strategy, which I won't read the whole thing, but the idea is walking alongside the local church globally. Because so often we have this concept of missions, and missionaries are the pioneers out there on the front lines of the gospel, and that was very true in our past, and we are very grateful for those who have done that. And that is still true in some parts of the world. But in the part of the world where we work and where many of our missionaries work, the church is strong, the church is established. The Church of God in Brazil is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. The leaders are amazing, and we have so much to learn from them. So our role is really to walk alongside them. What is God calling them to do in their setting, in their context, and how can we better equip them to do that? How can we add a little fuel to the fire that's already burning so that they can do what God is calling them to do better? And so for every missionary, that looks a little bit different in the place where they're serving and the type of work that they do. But for us, as regional connectors, we get to walk alongside 3 groups, which we'll share briefly about each one. We walk alongside our missionaries, we walk alongside our national leaders, and we walk alongside our partner churches.
So just in case any of you guys are wondering, like my 3-year-old, are we done yet? No, we're not done yet, just in case. So as we get to walk alongside our team, I'll just kind of start at the top left corner there. The Todd's family are serving in Brazil. They're in the Amazonian region, and they are the fastest church planting area that we've got in our region. They are planting more churches than any of our other regions. It's absolutely amazing how they've done it, and I'm trying to figure out if it's the water. It's definitely not the water, because that makes people run. Wow. Sorry about that one. Pun not intended on that. Anyway, it's getting warm in here. So we've got the Curley family in Paraguay. They are an amazing, amazing family. I could share countless stories with them and just the transformation that God has done in their life. And if you ever want to hear more of the story, email us, send us a text, and I'd love to sit down and talk with you more about it, because it's absolutely amazing, their story. We have the Ayala family. They are our most senior missionaries. They've been in Belize for the last over 30 years. They've been serving. Ironically, out of all the churches that we have, that is the one country that we do not have a church God presence in. However, the missionaries are working with 30 different denominations and movements in that region. And they have so many churches in that region, and they have built a bridge between the denominations that are currently existing. And our hope and future is in one day that we will have a church God presence there, or a conference, or some presence that symbolizes. But we don't want to do it just to check a box to say, hey, we got a church God here, when what we originally started at was a movement. And a movement to end all denominations. And it's so incredible to see what they have done and how they have bridged that gap between some very diverse theology within the different groups, and how they've just come to an understanding. I'll skip the Richies because I want to talk about them a little bit more. Deborah and Honeycutt, she is in Honduras. She is on the island of Roatan. So if you want to go on a mission trip, it is an English-speaking island. So the primary language is English-speaking, and so any of you teachers out there that want to teach, they are always looking for good teachers in the summer to come down and work with the kids. And I'll tell you, there's probably nobody harder working than Deborah. I'll tell you, I've brought groups there, and they usually last about 2 or 3 days before I find them sleeping on the picnic table. And it's warm. We have the Joneses that are serving in Bolivia. You'll see that Tabitha on the far right there just graduated. She's in college, so any of you empty nesters, you could be praying for them because they're trying to process what it's like to have their child in Texas while they're serving in Bolivia, and just how God has really called them to the next chapter in life of moving around. The Ritchie family, wanted to introduce them. They are our newest members of our team. They were just commissioned in Tampa at a convention this year. They will be coming down to join us in Costa Rica. And we chose that because this is a couple that's a little bit younger. They haven't had as much cross-cultural experience. They have traveled to different areas in Peru and so forth. And typically, when you recruit a missionary, the general sense was, get somebody that's got a lot of life experience because you're going to need it on the field. Get somebody that's seasoned, that is tough as nails, that they can handle the struggle of living cross-culturally. And we kind of took a different approach, just because we're a little odd in the sense of taking different approaches. And we went for the trainable, highly relational. This couple is extremely relational. And just to give a quick point, our home church, they're actually from our home church up in Bellingham, has come down I shouldn't say 3 years, it's 3 times, to our yearly or bi-yearly or every 2 years, COVID kind of messed things up, where we bring the group together and we bring all the missionaries together and we kind of have, I don't want to call it a retreat, but it's essentially a spiritual growth seminar where we just kind of pour back in the missionaries. And the kids have always been left in the corner. Historically, in these meetings, the kids get iPhones, iPads, coloring books, and nobody engages with them. And it's okay, the adults got to get together because we got to strategize and figure out what we're going to do. And so Cornwall says, hey, we're going to bring a team down to pour into the missionary kids. And so Brian and Melissa were on the first team, the second team, and the third team. And they just poured into the missionary kids. And Tabitha, who you saw that was just going to college, I think she was 16 at the time, literally at the end in tears. Because she's like, I've never felt so safe. I've never felt so loved. That somebody came in and understood where they were coming from. And I thought, man, that's what I want for our kids. I mean, as we've got 3 rambunctious kids, like I want to know that there's somebody that's caring for them. That's good. Because they got sucked into the call of Jason and Abby. You know, they just got sucked into the mission one. And so we always want to be cautious of what the impact that we have on our kids in our decisions that we make. But the Ritchies, we're super excited, not to mention that they're from our home church, but we get along with them. They're highly relational, and so they're going to join us, so we're going to be able to work with them, help train them. They're also going to be doing more emphasis on mission trips, what I'll get into a little bit later. And so as Abby said, we walk alongside 3. We walk alongside our missionaries. We walk alongside our national leaders, and I'll let Abby share about the national leaders.
Yeah, so as we walk alongside our national leaders, there's a lot of different stories that I could share, but one of the primary groups we work with is an international elected body that I mentioned earlier that's called the SEED. It's a long acronym in Spanish. I won't bore you. But they're basically from 3 different countries that are elected to serve as leaders in the region. And so we get to work closely with them. They're commissioning for the newest team that we had in Brazil at a convention in September of last year. But as we work with them, kind of their vision for the region has also, we've seen how God has been raising up in our heart and in their hearts many of the same, the heart for some of the same things. So one of them is theological education. Too often, many of our pastors have been in isolated areas, so they get their theology by Facebook or what's on the latest televangelist, and you can imagine that that's probably not the healthiest. And so we started looking at, okay, we've got some theological programs in some countries, and one of the biggest blessings of the pandemic was suddenly people were a lot more open to and had more access to online options. And so we said, you know, how can we give some of our pastors a boost? And so we actually have a project that's run through Anderson to give some assistance to some of our pastors as they participate in one of our theological training programs, whether that's in Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, or one through Anderson University that's a certificate program. And the SEED, the International Leadership Team, helps us vet, okay, this pastor needs X amount. Maybe this person only needs 25% help. Maybe this person needs 50% help. Maybe this person needs 100% paid for. And so we work very closely with them as they determine who needs the funds, and we get to help raise them. But it's really cool to see now our pastors engaging in what we know to be vetted, sound Church of God doctrine, theological programs. And so that's been an exciting development. Another one is is for Jason and me very much in the infancy stage, but we have a very strong heart for it, is the development of small businesses to support pastors or pastors' families. We will admit we do not have a business background, and we are still learning in this. But some of the ones we're learning from is Norberto Curley that Jason shared about their family earlier, has some programs in Paraguay. But one of the main ones we've been learning from is Pastor Donnie Allen in Honduras. I saw in your bulletin that you guys partner with Pastor Donnie. And so in Honduras, it's now 10 or 12 years old. They have an entrepreneurial training school where they teach church members small business principles, small business development principles. And they've had so much success with it, and they've found it to be so valuable that they've actually incorporated it into their church's discipleship program. So a family comes to the church, they come to know Jesus, they enter discipleship. As a part of that discipleship program, they actually have to do a year-long entrepreneurial training program. And so what if they don't want to run a small business? He said it's important for them to learn, even if they don't end up doing it as a career. And one of the reasons they do that is what is very much a political hot button in this country, and I'm not going to touch what you should believe on that one way or the other, but addressing the issue of migrants who leave Honduras and who come to the United States. And no matter how you feel about what should happen when they get to our borders, I don't think anyone would disagree that people are better off if they're able to grow and thrive and survive and function well in their home country. And so Pastor Donnie they've had multiple families from the Church of God in Honduras that have joined the caravans, and Pastor Donnie says, I always encourage them, don't do it. Let's find a way to get you to function here. But instead of just telling people don't do it and then leaving them to figure it out, they've developed this small business training to say, let's teach people to grow and thrive and function well in their home community and to provide for their families. And then as they provide for their families, they become godly business owners and godly employers if their business grows in the community, which impacts the community and helps the community grow and thrive. And ultimately, they also start tithing more to the church, which, of course, is a benefit to the church as well. And so they've really seen this as a holistic way of engaging people, and it's super exciting. And so we've been trying to learn more from Donnie as we can figure out how can some of our other countries begin to put this into practice. But just continue to pray for that program, pray for that ministry, pray for Honduras. As I mentioned, that we've had some from the Church of God that have joined some of those caravans. About 2 or 3 months ago, there was an accident in Mexico with a truck that flipped over, and a little boy lost his life, and he was actually one of our children from a Church of God congregation in Honduras, which suddenly makes things hit a whole lot closer to home when you watch the news. And so just be praying for Pastor Donnie, pray for the churches as they continue to find a way to minister and serve in a very challenging context, and yet where God is alive and moving. And also what we're seeing as Pastor Donnie's looking to engage his community and reach out there and have outreach in his community, we're seeing across the region this growing hunger and heart for serving the Lord, for proclaiming the good news, not just in their backyards, but also now around the world. There's been this traditional concept that the North Americans are the missionaries and everybody else receives missionaries, or maybe Germany has a few, but we're starting to see in Latin America now is people waking up to say, what if God's calling me? How can I go to serve? And so this is really in its infancy stage. We've had some people go from one country in Latin America to another, like we have a pastor serving in Peru from Chile, and a few of those that have crossed relatively close by borders. But about 3 years ago, a young woman in Argentina said, God is calling me to Japan. I want to go to Japan. I don't know what I'm going to do there or how to get there, but how can I get connected to the Church of God in Japan? And so we were able to say, okay, we're not going to own your ministry. This is not for us. This is not for North America to direct, control, or fund. But if we need to help connect you to the Church of God in Japan, we can do that. And so we called the coordinators of Asia, who talked to the Japanese missionaries and the Japanese churches, and they're putting together a plan for her to go to Japan. We also heard from Brazil that there's a heart now to go to Portugal or to Mozambique because they're Portuguese-speaking countries. The Church of God in Brazil, as Jason mentioned, is on fire. And they've said to our missionaries, we want to go to Mozambique. How do we get there? Or do we have churches in Mozambique? Is there anybody we can work with? Somehow the African leadership got wind of it, and they went to the regional coordinators of Africa and said, we hear that Brazil wants to send missionaries to Mozambique. We're having a hard time engaging in Mozambique. We know we have churches there, but none of us speak Portuguese. It's been really difficult for us to build a relationship there. Send us missionaries from Brazil. Well, how are we going to do that? And so in Tampa this last week, actually, we had a convention, the Church of God convention, and then afterward was an event called the Global Alliance, where representatives from around the world got together and said, how can we find a better way to connect and function? We said, here we are. We've got the international leaders from Latin America. We've got the international leaders from Africa. We have the coordinators from Latin America, or the connectors from Latin America, the coordinators from Africa, the missionaries from Brazil. There are 11 of us that are all part of this conversation. Let's have dinner together. And so we squeezed around one table that was made for 8, and we got all 11 of us in there, and we said, we're going to talk this through, and we're going to figure it out. So this is very, very, very new. Please be praying. But we're so excited about this hunger and this heart for Latin Americans to follow God's call overseas. And what in the world that's going to look like, we don't know yet. This is new. But just be praying. We're super excited about what God's doing there. So I'll turn it over to Jason now. He can share how we walk alongside our ministry partners.
So the last one, walking alongside our partners, is one of my favorites, honestly. Having been on missions in Cornwall, sending 163 individuals on short-term mission trips a year, was absolutely incredible to see. And I quickly learned as I was doing that, is even before being in that position, I went to Costa Rica multiple times. And I remember looking at the missionary, and it was Wayne Sellers, Kathy Wayne Sellers, and I said, okay, I'm doing the math here. I said, you can pay, at the time, it was like $10. You can pay somebody $10 to mix concrete all day in their country, but yet we're spending $1,200 to come down here to mix concrete. Something doesn't make sense here. Like, wouldn't it be better just to send the money and build the building 10 times faster and probably 10 times better? Because I don't know about you, if you ever mix concrete outside the U.S., they do the little volcano and they mix it by hand. Well, the first hour or so is actually pretty decent concrete. It's almost on par with the locals. But after about an hour, it becomes very soupy because the more water you add, the easier it is to mix. So then the concrete doesn't stick as well. So the quality isn't there. And I just looked at that and said, what are we doing wrong? And what is it about the element of having the connection? And so for me, the part, and what I didn't share in my story, was when I was pursuing the call for missions, prior to Abby actually, I said, Lord, if I work really hard, would you consider me doing cross-culture ministry? I'll work really hard. I'll create a nest egg. I will support myself so I don't have to raise my own funds because I don't want to raise my own funds. And would you consider? And God's response was, no, I don't want you when you're older. I want you now. And I want you dependent on me. And that's been probably the biggest struggle for me. And the pride is trying to depend on other people. But what God has done in that process is he has created a network of people around us that has encouraged us through prayer, through coming down and seeing the ministry, through financial giving, has enabled us to do this work. So as we share what the process of what we're doing and what's happening and throughout the entire region, know that you guys are impacting our entire region. Not just our entire region. You are impacting now in Africa, in Japan, in other areas, because through us, we're able to make those connections to different people because of the faithful giving that you guys do. And so there are many, many ways for you to engage. And I'll get into one of the ones of my favorite ones later. But there are many ways. First and foremost is prayer. And I don't remember the gentleman's name that talked about the things that we do. He was right on as exactly how we would prioritize things. And most of the time, I wouldn't even talk about the financial piece. I just kind of keep that aside, despite the fact that that's needed for the process we're doing. But prayer is so much important. And I can't tell you, not just prayer, but a letter, an email, something that just says, I'm thinking about you. If you guys would commit in your small groups to pick a missionary in our region or out throughout the world and just commit to praying for one of those missionaries and to send a note, whether it's email, we can get you guys the website, and just let them know that you're praying for them, because I'll tell you, those prayers and those little words of encouragement come at God's timing, where we are just in the trenches and we're just thinking, what are we going to do? And all of a sudden somebody sends a letter or a note or an email, and I'm just like, oh man, God, you are so good. You know when we need everything. As far as teams go, that is my passion. I love teams. And I will tell you that our teams are a little bit different. How many of you guys have been on a mission trip? Even in the U.S., I mean, anywhere, have you ever been on a trip? Okay, it's not the same as what you would think, okay? We have transitioned the construction element where we're going to go and build something to walking alongside the locals. And that looks in a variety of areas. So yes, we may do some painting. Yes, we may do some mixing concrete, but that's not our emphasis. What we are going is to build relationships. We're going down to encourage, to walk alongside them and join them in the ministry that they're doing, sharing testimonies. We take everybody that comes on a group. We've had everything from counselors to teachers to electrical engineers to finance, to everything you do in your world that you do here, that we take that and we present that to the church and say, hey, look, we've got this, we've got this, we've got this, we've got this. And they say, let's send them here, let's send them here, let's go here, and let's go do this. And we just incorporate what the gifts are. And we allow God to we just make the connection and let God cultivate that relationship. And so if you're capable of walking the short distance from your house to your car, and if even at the airport you need a wheelchair to get through, I know because I just had a transplant on my knee about 5 weeks ago, so I know the process of going through that. You can come on a trip. We've had young children come on trips, and I'll tell you quite honestly, they're my favorites because you always get things like, "Is he done yet?" They always know how to enliven the mood. But if you are ever considering the possibility of that, yes, I may go on a mission trip, and maybe it's not for everybody. But we are not training up missionaries to go outside of the U.S. because what we're really trying to do is raise up missionaries within the countries. But what we're really trying to do is raise up leadership right here in this community so that you guys will have a missional mindset when you go outside these doors, that you will become the next Josh Harrison, the guy that mentored me, the people that mentored Abby in that process, that you'll be the next mentor to encourage somebody because you never know where that person is going to be standing up on stage or their impact that God will use them in their ministry. The last one, how many of you guys have cell phones? Okay, it's okay. The pastor hasn't told me I can't do it. So if you have a cell phone, hold it up. I want to see your cell phone. So now some of you that are technologically advanced, there's this little fancy QR code that you can open up your camera, point it at it, and click the link. This is our newsletter. I have a little bit of a competition with Abby to see when I'm in charge of this aspect. I always try to see how many people I can get signed up for the newsletter. And the reason that I say this is not financial. This is not anything related to financial. What this does is allows us to do our job in the sense of we have a newsletter that Abby puts together and sends out what our prayer requests are, what's happening in Latin America, and how you guys can be praying for us. And what that does is that allows us to be able to share to you and your congregation so you guys know how to be praying for us. And it never fails that somebody contacts us on the newsletter that says, hey, I got a niece that's really considering about going on a mission trip. Where would you incorporate her? And we would love to make that connection for somebody else. Somebody else has said, hey, look, I've got friends or relatives that live in Costa Rica. They're right over here, and they haven't found a church. So if you don't want to do the technological Zoom this because I don't quite understand it, I'm getting a little bit older, there is a phone number there that you can text. And if you just text it with your email and your name and say newsletter, we'll sign you guys up so you guys don't have to put all your information in there. But help us to do our job by knowing how to pray for us, to stay connected and engaged. And then that way you have all our information. Our Facebook's up there. So if God is stirring in your heart to go on a mission trip or to create a mission trip for your church, we are really well networked in Western PA. So there are other churches that would be engaged in going on a trip. And how cool would that be to have 5 people from this church, 5 people from another church, and 5 people from another church to be able to come down and represent Western PA.
So just to close, just to build off of what Jason said, and we'll wrap it up soon here, but I just want to go back to the verse that I mentioned earlier. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And I just want to remind you of a truth that we all know but so often forget, which is just that God has plans for us in this time, in this place, and in this season, right here, right now, where we are. And maybe some of you are going through a time right now that's the best you've ever had. You love your stage of life. You love your season. God has plans for you here. Maybe some of you are going through a stage of life that you'd rather not be in right now. Maybe you're, whether you're getting older or whether your kids are annoying you or whether your job is terrible or, whatever it is, as a reminder that God has plans for you in this time, in this place, and in this season, but not just for you. And I I think that's what we've been taking away from our experiences as we've grown up and seen the way that people have walked alongside us. We have a God who walks alongside us right here, right now, whether we're in the promised land or whether we're in exile. But he's calling us also to walk alongside the people that he's placed in our path. Because just as he told the Israelites, seek the welfare of the city to which I've called you into exile, because if it prospers, you too shall prosper. If you read the rest of the story of the Old Testament, you see the way that you have Esther, that you have Daniel, and you have pagan kings declaring the glory of God, because the people of God were faithful in the time and the place and the season where God had called them. So I just want to encourage you to take a moment just to identify in your mind, who is that person that God is calling you to walk alongside right now? Who is that person in your house, in your family? Or who is that neighbor, coworker, classmate? Who is that person that God is calling you to walk alongside right here, right now, in this stage, in this season of your life? Because God has plans for you, and God has plans for that person. And he's invited each and every one of us to be a part of his mission and to share the hope and the love of a God who loves us all. So thank you so much again for having us this morning. Thank you for walking alongside us as we walk alongside the Church of God in Latin America. Thank you for your love, your prayers, your partnership. I don't know how to express how much it truly means, but you're making a difference in walking alongside us, and we just want to encourage you to continue doing that, whether it's with us, through the church, in your neighborhood, your work, your schools, everywhere you go. So thank you again so much. We'll be out in the back afterward if you have any questions, would like to hear any more. We'll be happy to share that. So.
And Pastor, if you could pass that bag of coffee to the congregation, I've got another bag for you in the car. So I'll make sure that there's no fighting for that bag of coffee. So thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for the time you spent sharing with us today. If you haven't been watching your watches, your cell phones, your clocks, or whatever, you'll notice that we've still got some time before we normally end our service. And so at this point, I'm going to launch into the sermon that I've prepared. So I'm kidding. No, but actually what we're going to do before we close our service, they don't know that I'm going to do this. It was kind of not something that I really intended. But I'm going to invite Jason and Abby to come down, and then I'm going to invite everybody, if you're willing to come surround them, because we're going to pray over them. Because even as they're here with us, they're going from place to place. They're traveling, staying with different people, going to different venues, different settings. And then, of course, there's the component of what they're doing. They're living internationally. They're traveling. They're out and about, and they're doing some really wonderful and important things for the kingdom of God. Something that we get to, in a small way, participate in and share in. But I would invite you to come forward as we prepare.